Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Observability Talks. I'm your host, Dotan Horvitz, and here at Open Observability Talks, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. So may the open source be with you. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Logs.io, the cloud-native observability platform. Logs.io takes the best-of-breed open source projects such as Prometheus, OpenSearch, Jaeger, OpenTelemetry, and others, and offers them as a unified observability platform built for scale. For those joining the live stream on YouTube or Twitch, feel free to share questions and comments on the live chat. It will make things much more interesting for us here on the show. And with that, let's move on to today's episode. We all know that observability is a must-have for operating systems in production, as we all do. That's established, but we often neglect our own backyard, our software release process, essentially. I've seen that in companies I've worked with as well. And this leads teams to wasting time and energy in handling failures in the CI/CD pipeline and makes the developer on duty shifts tedious. I've seen that multiple times. In this episode, we'll discuss how to achieve effective observability into our CI/CD pipeline. We'll discuss what's supported in common projects such as Jenkins and others, and the best practices for that. To discuss that, I invited a CI/CD veteran, someone who's been a core maintainer for the Jenkins project for over a decade, Oleg Nenashev. He's also a member of the Technical Oversight Committee in the Continuous Delivery Foundation, the CDF, and he's also a CDF ambassador, amongst many other titles. He's also an observability veteran, not just a CI/CD. He worked at Dynatrace and other things we'll hear about very soon. So definitely the right person for this discussion. Hey, Oleg.
Hi, thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thanks for joining me. And actually, I mentioned you're a CDF ambassador, but we're also together on the CNCF ambassadors team. So first of all, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been an honor to join the team. So I was elected to CNCF ambassadors in April. So I announced at KubeCon, and yeah, it has been really active. There is a small community of ambassadors, and yeah, a lot of things are happening there.
Yeah, coming from the CDF, which is a relatively small foundation, to the CNCF, I assume the scale is slightly different.
Yeah, we have how many? 300 ambassadors or so. Yeah, so it's quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So I presented a few of your titles, but maybe you give us your broad experience in a nutshell, both on the CI/CD and on the observability space, so that people can understand why you're the authority on that.
Yeah, I definitely won't be presenting all my titles, because even in Jenkins it will take maybe a few minutes. I call myself, I'm definitely not a mother of dragons in Jenkins, but yeah, father of many bugs, sorry. But yeah, going back to CI/CD and to my career, actually I started as a hardware and embedded engineer, and my first project was actually about observability too. But it was a true Russian style of observability, oil flow monitoring based on X-ray spectrum analysis. So it basically involves radioactivity and oil. What else would you expect? But yeah, ever since, for me, it was every project I worked on, there was always some bits of observability, whether it was a hardware project, or software project, or automation infrastructure. All the time, you basically end up with a question how to actually troubleshoot your system, how to expose the data that helps you to troubleshoot. So for me, definitely, I'm not a newcomer to the observability space. And that's why I was so excited when OpenTelemetry project started. I believe we will talk about OpenTelemetry a bit later, but yeah, for me, it's one of the key highlights on the open observability space, of course.
Yeah, so people hear a lot about OpenTelemetry on this show, and definitely we'll cover that in this episode as well.
Yeah. So how I got to the CI/CD space? Actually, well, pretty much as everyone else, in hardware, embedded, you have a lot of test automation. So eventually you need automation systems. For me, I started with Hudson, I believe in 2009. So basically when Hudson was gaining popularity. And then it happened basically as usual. There were issues with our builds. I fixed these builds. So then I started owning how it wasn't even pipeline at that stage. It was freestyle jobs, so all classic stuff. And yeah, later actually I've been switching more and more towards developer tooling. So in hardware there is term electronic design automation. In software, well, there are just developer tools. So I gradually switched more towards that area, and I started maintaining more and more automation infrastructure in my companies. So when I joined Synopsys, it was 2012. By the time I was basically leading automation infrastructure for a small department of 300 engineers and many sites. And all the automation infrastructure was built on the top of Jenkins. It was still before Docker was a thing, but yeah, it was already solidly based on infrastructure as code, configuration as code. And of course, observability for us has been a really big problem because the scale was 10 sites, a lot of computing grids. So maybe you heard about things like this SunGrid engine. So it was before the Kubernetes clusters, but it was basically the same in terms of resource management, scaling problems. And when you run services there, of course, you need to understand how the infrastructure behaves. Jenkins and the other CI/CD systems are inherently remote code execution as a service. So what it means is that there is a lot of machines connected to each other. If you do things right on these machines, it's okay. If you don't, then you definitely need to troubleshoot the stuff. And
that's what led you to Jenkins. You've been there for over a decade now, right?
Exactly. So I joined the Jenkins community in 2012, shortly after Hudson was renamed to Jenkins. It's not a fork, it's renaming. And what happened next? So initially, I got permission to contribute because we needed to improve security, to basically align Jenkins security, especially authentication and authorization model with company requirements. And I was lucky to finally get permission to contribute to open source because in hardware companies, it's not easy. I probably created 3 private source versions of a VCS plugin. So it's a simulation tool for hardware. And when I got permission to contribute to open source, I started from role strategy and a few other plugins. So I created, for example, job restrictions plugin for Jenkins and created ownership-based security model there. So our key goal was to empower developers to actually maintain their jobs, maintain their projects and their products as a part of ecosystem with folders, etc. And there was a big ecosystem around that built for our internal users. And then, well, how I became maintainer, basically the same as maintainer of automation infrastructure. There were, of course, issues with Jenkins. Nothing always works as expected in open source or in private source. So I started submitting fixes here and there. And finally, I was annoying enough that somebody gave me write permissions to Jenkins core. So this is a real story of how I became a Jenkins core maintainer. So there was no election, nothing. I just got permissions and I started helping out. And it was
the advantage of joining young projects before they have established governance and processes and everything.
No, Jenkins wasn't young at that point. Jenkins was already almost 10 years old, actually, and 8 years as open source project. But Jenkins has a different philosophy from many other projects, especially in the CNCF landscape, because in Jenkins, actually, the idea is to empower contributors as much as possible. So, for example, maintainers of plugins, maintainers of ecosystem, there is a really low entry bar. And for the Jenkins core at that point, it was also quite a low entry bar because definitely it lacked maintainers. So the idea was that if we could onboard more people, we could introduce better contributor experience. And then over time, we could basically introduce additional processes, assistance tools, and this is what happened. So by 2020, we actually improved the maintenance process for the Jenkins core quite a lot, from many things, including release automation. You won't believe, but until 2019, Jenkins was released from Kosuke's, so Kosuke Kawaguchi, he's a creator of Jenkins. So until that time, Jenkins was released just from his machine because it was the only way to release the project, because now it changed.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's jump forward to today,
Mhm.
and with your vast experience and knowledge of Jenkins, maybe we can start by, even before talking about observability, just giving us the what's new with Jenkins and the Jenkins ecosystem in the past recent period.
Yeah, so it's actually quite a good question. In my case, I've been on a kind of sabbatical in Jenkins since the war in Ukraine started, because I changed my priorities. I dedicate quite a lot of time to volunteering and some of other personal events. And I still participate in the Jenkins governance board. I help people, but I don't participate actively in maintenance now. Um, but what happens in the project in recent years? There have been quite a lot of improvements, and actually, I try to position most of these improvements either as cloud native focus, so basically enabling Jenkins utilization in modern deployments, including Kubernetes, public clouds, with Kubernetes or not. And the second part was actually developer experience, because there's a lot of things that improved experience with Jenkins. For example, you may hate Jenkins web interface, but actually even the interface of Jenkins controller changed a lot. But in fact, you do not need this interface much these days because, for example, we have quite a good GitHub integration through GitHub apps. So for the majority of use cases, developers can see the results right inside the GitHub pull requests. And there were a lot of changes like that, which actually made Jenkins usage quite useful, quite easy in the modern environment. For cloud deployments, yes, there is a lot of capabilities these days. There is official Helm chart, there is official operator for Jenkins that allows scaling instances to zero if needed. Jenkins itself is not cloud native, but Jenkins built ecosystem at the moment is cloud native. So basically, built infrastructure with Kubernetes plugin, with other plugins can scale across multiple instances quite easily, and you just need a server which basically operates as a control plane. So Jenkins controller by now, well, it has always been a kind of control plane with web UI. We haven't decoupled this part. I would be super happy to decouple them, but still it remains the same architecture. Still, deployment to Kubernetes of Jenkins became quite easy. There are distributions allowing that. Of course, Jenkins became fully integrated with configuration as code. So I was happy to participate in the configuration as code plugin development and in early stages of Docker changes, pipeline as code changes. So now, Jenkins as we know it now, it's completely different from Jenkins 10 years ago in terms of operations experience. This is why some of my experience is not quite relevant.
Interesting.
Going back to CI/CD space, for Jenkins itself, there were a lot of investments in observability for a long time because Jenkins is distributed system is complex to manage. And since 2018, I believe, there has been continuous investment in better reporting, better analytics. We integrated additional monitoring frameworks in Jenkins. Then when OpenTelemetry became available, shortly after, there was OpenTelemetry plugin for Jenkins that did some initial integration. Then later, for example, I was mentoring a student who worked on OpenTelemetry integration for Jenkins agents, so these remote built engines that connect to the system. And now we can actually get insights about Jenkins being used as your pipelines. So even if you trigger the build outside of Jenkins, so then all the spans reach the Jenkins side. And then when Jenkins invokes build tools, because Jenkins itself, it doesn't build your project, it invokes the tool for that. So whether it's Maven, Gradle, or something else, all these tools by now also have some integration with OpenTelemetry. And it has been super exciting to use, let's say, Jaeger or Prometheus with some additional Grafana dashboards and see all breakdown of distributed builds. So you were able to navigate across multiple instances, multiple containers, because now we, for example, on Jenkins CI, we package most of build steps in separate containers, so similarly like Tekton and Argo do, and I believe this is a good approach. But still, you get full observability in your pipeline, regardless of how many virtual and physical hosts are being involved. And for me, it has been super helpful compared to what I've been doing 10 years ago with Nedgers and with a lot of integrations trying to hook Jenkins into them.
Yeah, that's for sure. So actually, it's interesting to see that Jenkins is making steps towards the cloud native approach. I guess you're also the connecting link, having both your capacity as the CNCF and the CDF. You can bring this together, the cloud native CI/CD.
I'm not alluded about cloud native, but what I keep saying about Jenkins, that it doesn't have to be cloud native. What it has to be is being cloud friendly. So it means that for users, it's easy to deploy Jenkins in the cloud or in Kubernetes. You definitely get all this scalability capabilities. You definitely get pluggable storage and many other things that enable you to deploy Jenkins in your custom environments. But at the same time, Jenkins as a controller isn't cloud native. And it's 2023. And to be honest, I do not believe that Jenkins should become cloud native at the moment, because it's a massive investment. There would be a lot of breaking changes here and there. And in my opinion, it's not longer justified because there is a lot of other cloud native CI and CD solutions. So for me, a lot of Jenkins value comes from the fact that it's actually not cloud native as a controller. And I think this is something I wouldn't change for now.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting insight. And also on the CNCF, obviously there's Argo, there's a Flux project. I think you mentioned some of them also, and both actually graduated end of last year. And these projects are also in the CI/CD space. And then we have GitOps and targeting cloud native domain. So I don't know, maybe wearing your CNCF ambassador hat, can you give us a quick intro onto these and how they map to the space?
Yeah, I'm definitely, even if I'm Jenkins governance board member, I'm not a Jenkins zealot. So for example, now, to be honest, I use more GitHub Actions or Tekton than Jenkins. And why not? Because Jenkins is just a tool and everything else is just a tool. So for me, it's good to actually provide interoperability. And when I joined CDF TOC, my key objective was to actually facilitate interoperability between the projects, and only after then observability of the projects. So going to the cloud native space, as you mentioned, there is a lot of tools. Actually, there is insane number of different tools that address many bits of continuous delivery. Fortunately or not, with adoption of DevOps practices, etc., actually CD became a priority to CI. This is something that, to be honest, makes me always sad. And this is why, for example, in the ambassador chat, I raised the question. So would anyone be interested to have cloud native CI webinars? But yeah, actually, what happens these days is that, there is continuous integration part that to some extent got really simplified for cloud native applications. So, I mean, not so many developers do coverages, deeper integration testing. Yes, there is a lot of focus in security, but still, compared to how we used to do CI for embedded projects, for hardware projects, I think there is a lot of things that could be improved. And there is delivery tools that actually got massive boost with introduction of Kubernetes, because there is a whole landscape of tools, and I would say that half of the tools are somehow related to delivery and deployment. So you take Helm and CNCF, for example, on its quadrant says that Helm is the only carrier-grade delivery tool. It was 1 year ago, so maybe it changed by now. But yeah, it might feel a bit old. But yeah, if you just look in a nutshell, of course, Helm is a delivery tool. And basically, when we talk about more classic tools with pipelines, yeah, of course, we have Argo. Well, we have multiple Argos actually. So we have Argo rollouts, we have Argo CD that have slightly different use cases and implementations. So whether you like DevOps, GitOps or not, you can find a tool for you. Then, of course, Flux. Then really on the cloud native space, we also have Tekton. So Tekton is a graduated project in the Continuous Delivery Foundation, but it's basically a part of this ecosystem. I would say that foundation placement is more question of politics than a question of technology. But yeah, this is a separate topic. And there is also a lot of tools that actually enable particular bits. So for example, if you need to manage environments, you have Crossplane. So you use Crossplane, you can easily deploy environments for your integration testing purposes, let's say, or for production if needed. Then there is, for example, Istio. So if you do progressive delivery, if you do A/B testing, most likely you go with Istio to manage traffic for your system. Is it a delivery tool then? I guess so. And this is actually where I lead to, is that continuous delivery and continuous deployment and even continuous integration is not a single tool. It's a whole ecosystem of tools. And actually, for you as an organization, it's rather policy, culture, and process. It's not, and tools just enable it and automate it. So you can take a lot of tools. There is a huge inventory for different use cases, but all these activities actually start from your organization and organizational approach to the delivery of your software.
Yeah, that's for sure. And we've been restating that in this show and other places so many times. And still, you're right that people tend to focus on the tools, maybe because it's the easiest to comprehend. Because the messiest are the people, the people and processes. So people go to where it's easiest and it's the tool, but definitely the tools is not the sum total of that. And you mentioned the CDF a few times. We actually covered the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation, in a past episode with Andy Grabner from Dynatrace and from the Captain Project about a year ago. But a year passed, and you also a CDF TOC member until recently. So maybe you can give us the latest updates from the CNCF this past year?
Sure. So actually, what was nothing that effective July 1st, I'm no longer on the CDF Technical Oversight Committee. I still remain a contributor to the TOC. I still act as ambassador, and I will continue contributing. But regarding my role on the TOC board, even when I got elected, I said that I'm just taking one term because I believe in rotation of public roles in open source, and this is something I always want to see. So I haven't planned to continue with this role, and yeah, I continue in the foundation, and I will do my best to enable its success. But yeah, at the same time, now my only public title is CNCF ambassador, CDF ambassador. Okay, so this foundation, there were quite a lot of changes over time in the foundation. But what happened in the last year, that foundation actually grew in terms of projects. So one of big highlights last year that Project Persia joined. So Project Persia is distributed delivery network for artifacts or distributed package delivery system, whatever you choose. So again, it has delivery in equation. Again, it's not a classic pipeline tool, but the vision of the Continuous Delivery Foundation is that actually it wants to enable all stages of software delivery, not just have a bunch of competing continuous integration and continuous delivery tools that they implement pipelines. So Project Persia was one of big highlights. Another big highlight was that actually Tekton project got graduated. So it's a second project to graduate in the foundation after Jenkins. There were quite a lot of adjustments there, and we worked closely with contributors to enable that. And another thing that's rather more important for ecosystem is CD events. Because CD events, again, for me, CD events falls into the observability space, because for me, eventing is actually one of the key ways to do observability, and actually what is still missing from OpenTelemetry, in my opinion. Because for me, in OpenTelemetry there is traceability spans, but spans are not always like events. Basically everyone does wrap events into spans, but still for me it's another type of data. And in the cloud native space, we have cloud events. So cloud events is basically a project that allows to send and receive events within the system. So basically it's a way of asynchronous communication. And this is heavily used for various kinds of observability within the system. So for example, there are projects like Tecton pipelines, Jenkins that integrate with CD events to send data. There is also Knative that actually uses cloud events quite a lot internally for various kinds of communications and reactions. And I think that it's actually a super important part for observability purposes. And what the Continuous Delivery Foundation invested in is interoperability of CI/CD systems and basically unifying a way to communicate the events through cloud events. So there is a specification built on the top of that, which is called CD events. The specification is relatively simple. I mean, there was a massive effort put into review how events happen in different systems, because as you can imagine, Jenkins, Tecton, GitHub Actions, all of them are different. And still there was an interest to have a generic extensible layer that would support various kinds of systems. And I think that this effort provided quite good results. And now there is a standard which was released as 1.0 recently. It's available for evaluation and adoption. And I know that Dotton has an OpenTelemetry enhancement proposal that would basically adopt a similar standard in OpenTelemetry for CI and CD purposes. So I guess it's something we are going to discuss today for sure.
Yeah, and actually, I as part of the original proposal that I brought up, CD events was definitely referenced directly within the proposal. Maybe I should say a word about that. So essentially, there's a process for in open source projects in general, and then the OpenTelemetry is no exception for proposing extensions. In OTL, it's called OTEP, OpenTelemetry Extension Proposal. And since I kept on seeing in many places the need for CI/CD observability, as I said also in the opening words of this episode, so much so that I thought it makes perfect sense to be just a first level citizen use case of OpenTelemetry itself. So I brought it up as an extension proposal for the community, for the OpenTelemetry community, to make the actual semantic conventions and schema support for CI/CD types of pipelines, runs, and so on. And since we're not starting in a void, and as you said, there has been quite a bit of work being done also in the CDF, in the Continuous Delivery Foundation, it made perfect sense to me to look into the CD events specification as a good starting point, and maybe a good point for collaboration between the two foundations. It gets confusing, as you said. Sometimes it's more politics than technology, like why Argo and Flux are in CNCF, and then you see non-CI/CD projects under the CDF, like PeerCI and others. So I don't really care about politics. I'm not a politician. What I do care is that if there is a value, a concrete value, and a lot of thought put into formalizing what a continuous delivery event is, what's the types of events, what's the semantic conventions, and so on, there is definitely a good base point to start off of that and create native support in OpenTelemetry. So OpenTelemetry is sort of the way to collect events from in an agnostic way across different tools and maybe tool chains, if there's more than one tool, speaking the same language, reporting in an agnostic, vendor agnostic and tool agnostic manner, and in a way to organize, collect, to aggregate, to draw insights, and then also forward it downstream to any analytics tool that people may choose to analyze and gain observability into their CI/CD pipelines, essentially. And it's very early on, so I'll post the link here and also on the show notes for the podcast listeners. But happy to get more people involved and any thought process in formulating what we need there. You being an authority, obviously, you're one of the people I turned to very early on to get your take on that. So happy to get your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, so for me, CD events is definitely an interesting project. Even before CD events started officially, there were actually some initiatives. So, for example, in Jenkins, we created the first version of Cloud Events plugin. Again, it was a Google Summer of Code project. I was rather technical advisor there. I wasn't mentoring it. But the idea was to actually enable observability for the systems and also connect bits of the system. Because as you said, Doton, you may have multiple tools, and you're most likely to have multiple tools these days, especially when it comes to CI/CD, because the only common thing between CI/CD is a slash between them. And for example, Jenkins itself, thanks to all the history of investment into continuous integration part, into recording, deep analysis, etc., it's a perfect CI tool and CI framework. While it can easily connect, for example, with Argo for deployment purposes, it's actually very popular in cloud native space, such kind of combination. Or maybe you could take Spinnaker that basically orchestrates multiple tools, including Jenkins and others for whole delivery pipeline. But the problem that all these tools still have to communicate with each other, and hence a common language like CD events is super useful. Another reason for that is that actually it allows you to create developer tooling for that, because all such tools, they also need some capabilities for debugging, troubleshooting, analytics. So it's not like putting all this data into a Grafana dashboard and having all the insights. Special tools are needed most of the time. For example, CD Events has a CLI that actually provides some generation and analytics capability. There are floating ideas about having more tools around this space. And with growing adoption, of course, more tools will be created. And it also allows other people to actually build on the top of generic event, because you can create a lot of hooks, a lot of integrations. So, for example, in my previous company, there was integration between Jenkins and Slack that was actually using Cloud Events implementation just to take the data. It wasn't using the embedded Slack plugin due to some additional data requirements. So it was collecting more data from the system, from observability, and basically providing insights for users. And it was using all these open protocols to extract the data. On the second side, when we talk about these tools, it's also a good opportunity for producers, because you can trigger different events and trigger different continuous delivery and deployment operations through the standard protocol. So, for example, if you use progressive delivery, if you use A/B testing, integration with Cloud Events is one of the ways to actually orchestrate your pipeline. So for me, for example, when we talk about, so currently I work from WireMock. WireMock is quite a popular API mocking solution for many technologies, mostly started with Java, it now supports many other languages. And what we can do with Cloud Events, we can firstly receive these events, and based on these events, we can actually initialize some mocked API providers for your test environments, and we can make it fast, so the feedback loop for your developers is much quicker. And of course, we can also connect to Cloud Events and actually emulate your system for different kind of purposes. So this is example of basically a tool that is quite external to the observability space, but which again can leverage all these capabilities. And many other tools we have in the ecosystem can find some additional use cases for security purposes, for deployment purposes, etc., etc. So I think that such a standard is actually super helpful, and I'm looking forward to see more adoption of CD events in the ecosystem.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. And going back to the pain, I think even within my current company, Logs.io, and we've been doing, as Logs.io is all about observability, and we've done that so well on production. Still, when I looked into the CI/CD pipelines, I saw the gap. I saw that there's like we give ourselves discount for some reason and not investing as much on the release cycle. And we've been through a process in which we realized we were heavy users at the time of Jenkins, and we've been trying to maximize as much as possible on the native Jenkins. And at some point, we realized we just need to employ the same telemetry pipelines that as we do on the production environments, collect all this telemetry, store it in an accessible way, create dashboards, create alerts, all the pipeline just like we do. And actually, last year at the CD Summit, Continuous Delivery Summit in Detroit, back then it was co-located with KubeCon, I delivered a talk especially about how we achieved CI/CD into our own observability into our own CI/CD pipelines, just by using the same tool chain like OpenSearch, Prometheus, Jaeger, and so on and so forth. So this is a very interesting story, and part of that was also utilizing the Jenkins native plugin for OpenTelemetry. And one of the pretty parts that I liked was actually employing tracing, looking at a pipeline run as a trace with the various steps as spans, and then analyzing it in this view. And actually you can then it goes beyond CI/CD, I guess, into the build process, but you can actually get, for example, integration with Maven, and then you can, what used to be one opaque long span, suddenly you can open it up and break down also the Maven steps of the build. And it's like you suddenly get insights that you didn't have before. And as you said, when you have this is not yet a standard, obviously, but this gave me the sense of what the power of a standard may be, because then you could fetch things from, I don't know, from Maven and from Ansible and from obviously Jenkins and Argo and whatnot. And if they all speak the same language and you can tailor all of that together, you can get so deep in your granularity, as deep as you need, obviously, but you can go in and out in granularity depending on where you focus your investigation. That for me was very insightful, and in a way, both working on this topic and writing, I wrote a long form article about that, and later on the responses that I got after delivering the talk gave me the push that we need to make it into an integral part of the open source discussion around OpenTelemetry. But that was fascinating.
So for me, it's not only about going deep, but also about going to the high level. Because for us, historically, it was a problem that each tool, so there is a lot of CI and CD tools, each of them had some notion of observability, troubleshooting, analytics embedded. And we as users, as maintainers of these systems, had to use multiple tools. But now, with having a unified standard based on OpenTelemetry, CD events, and other technologies, we can actually rebuild the whole delivery trace from commit, or if you want, even from merge train, from group of commits. Even you can just hook on value stream and build observability from very beginning, even before the code appears. And then you get observability to all stages and all tools used for these stages with all the information. So this is invaluable information for all kinds of development. And well, basically, this is what we already do in production. And this is what is important part, because if for me, one of key takeaways from DevOps culture, etc., that everything is a product. And basically your operations infrastructure, your delivery process is integral part of the product if you want to actually do continuous delivery, continuous deployment, and well, speaking marketing, beating your customers beating your competitors to the market. Hopefully not customers.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I really invite people to chime in. That's the beauty in open source. It's not that someone like me or Oleg is our authorities to decide. It's actually a group discussion by the community. And do look us up in the CNCF Slack. There's a channel CICD observability, but in a short, so O11Y. So CICD-O11Y. Sorry. This is the Slack channel for this discussion. Chime in. Obviously, on the GitHub, I shared the link for the proposals on the GitHub itself. and hopefully to make it more formalized. And also good to see the discussion on the CDF side, on the continuous delivery side, in multiple SIGs. So obviously the CD events that was mentioned, but then there's also the interoperability SIG and the best practices SIG, right? Lots of discussion around observability in the CDF.
Yeah, observability these days is a table stake. So basically, any special interest group, any think tank that is focused on improving operations experience or developer experience will eventually talk about observability. That's for sure.
And I should mention, for those at least on the live stream, that this month, on the 25th of July, if I'm not mistaken, we'll discuss this proposal of OpenTelemetry extension for CI/CD observability on the CD events working group call of the CDF. So you're all welcome to join and chime in. It's open for all. So do check it out. And for those who are listening on the podcast applications, that will be already after that. But do check out the notes from that call. It should be interesting also to read the notes from that discussion. There's another point that I wanted to discuss with you. The previous episode we had here on the show, I did that on Backstage project, where I hosted the director of engineering from Spotify, who leads the project development. And essentially, Backstage is an internal developer platform that Spotify developed for its engineering, and then open sourced and donated it to the CNCF. That's for those who weren't here for the last episode. And I know that you dug into Backstage, and in particular, you looked into being an observability aficionado. You looked at the observability side of things. So do you want to share with us what options are there for Backstage observability?
Well, yeah. So Backstage itself, it's actually a developer portal. So the idea of developer portal is quite simple. You bring in all metrics, all information that is useful for your development into a single place. And of course, when we talk about operations, when we talk about delivery, all kinds of observability data should be there too. So for example, if your pipeline fails, you want to have quick access to some tips about why it failed. If your application failed in production, basically the same. If you manage, let's say, A/B testing, if you manage feature flags, you also want to have all these insights on this portal, because this is a kind of your control point and operation center for all kinds of operations. And when it comes to CI/CD, I believe that for every developer, there should be something on this portal. So whether you use Argo, whether you use Jenkins, Tekton, GitHub Actions, you need to have quick access. So ideally on the developer portal, when the pipeline starts failing, you get a big notice with some additional observability tips to access things quicker. And the question is how you actually get it. So for Backstage, Backstage has some notion of plugin ecosystem. I would say that a lot to be improved there. So one of my friends, Anton Weiss, he's actually working on some experiments about developer portal and plugin ecosystem. In principle, if you take a standard tool, let's say Jenkins, Argo CD, whatever, you install a plugin for Backstage and get it working. And there are plugins for these tools. The problem is with these plugins that all of them are different and none of them actually includes much of observability at the moment. And for that, it would, again, this is another opportunity for having open standard and open integrations, because you could create a Backstage plugin, let's say for CD events or for CI/CD observability with OpenTelemetry. So basically the proposal Dotton and many others are working on. And then once you have this plugin or integration, you just connect it. And regardless of your CI/CD system, basically you get the information. So whatever you use under the hood, maybe you have multiple tools, but still, if there is common notion, let's say delivery failure, success with some metadata that you can reverse engineer. So this is already a part of the standard proposal. Then you can also show these regardless of how the system is implemented. And for me,
but we
this
do
is
have
where
an
we should
extension,
go.
right? We have an OTel existing plugin. Before even going to the standardizing it, can you tell us a bit about the OTel existing plugin, the DORA
Yeah,
metric, etc.?
yeah, so there is existing plugin. This existing plugin, well, actually, there are multiple existing plugins, like it happens in open source. The idea is that, yeah, since OpenTelemetry has a standard interface, if you use a tool like Prometheus, you can also use PromQL to extract the data, which is much more capable than just OpenTelemetry. So you're unlikely to use Backstage as endpoint for receiving OpenTelemetry data, right? Most likely you will query a database. So there is a tool behind OpenTelemetry that stores and exposes this data. So it could be, yeah, it could be Prometheus, it can be Datadog, Dynatrace, whatever. And if you can query this data, you can actually display this data. And what OpenTelemetry integration does, it basically, and Grafana, there is also Grafana plugin. So basically they provide you with a set of standard dashboards for common operations. So I believe there is a template for DORA metrics that makes some assumptions based on existing tools and actually can get you started quickly. So personally, I'm not a fan of DORA metrics at all, but well, for management, for slides, it's okay. And yeah, it's something that gets you started. If you need something more complicated, yes, you can create dashboards in your tool. You can embed these dashboards into your developer portal. So for example, if you build Grafana, you would just embed them into the Backstage. You don't need to rebuild them again inside Backstage. And
I think that you're looking into also having some addition of your own to the ecosystem, no?
Oh, well, I would be interested in. So for me, yeah, there are a few parts that I've been looking into. So of course, WireMock itself is interesting for me because WireMock API mocking is being used quite widely. And for me, it would be interesting to have something on the developer portal. And another thing that is interesting for me is, of course, open feature. Because yeah, I've participated in the open feature project since the launch. Is open source feature flag management framework. It's vendor neutral in terms of the specification. And for me, one of the interest topics is actually to create a vendor neutral tool chain. So for example, have an SDK that could be embedded into whatever project without actually bringing in a lot of vendor dependent code. Not because I don't like vendors, but because I want my users to have freedom of choosing vendors. And basically the same, it would be interesting for tools I use in my daily job, including Backstage. So again, it's a question of unifying things, and this is another open standard you want to have in Backstage. So for me, all of that basically, once you have an open standard, you can definitely create tooling for that. And for me, yeah, tooling is just my job.
Yeah, sounds good. We are about to run out of time for the fireside chat before moving on to the updates. But can you share where people can follow you and reach out?
Mm-hmm. Well, you can follow me basically on any platform. So if Twitter is still alive when you watch this video, you can follow me on Twitter. Otherwise, there is Linktree account that aggregates the links. And in my case, yeah, I'm on the CNCF Slack, I'm on the CDF Slack, so you can just reach out there and ask any kinds of questions you have. And if you also want to chat about the adoption perspectives, because currently the adoption is probably one of the biggest problems for all these tools, because the ecosystem is still a bit scattered. So there is a lot of implementations yet to be created, though there are some hacks and tweaks and standalone tools that allow to somehow integrate if needed. And if you want to chat about that, I would be happy to do so.
Sounds good. So with that, let's move on to the breaking news. And
So
the
what do
first
we
one,
break?
actually, the first one that I chose is actually, especially for you, I found it very interesting. The continuous delivery, the state of continuous delivery report that the CDF produced fairly recently. So first of all, I wanted to share with the audience, and obviously worthwhile having a look at the full report. I'll post the link as always on the the chat here and on the show notes for the listeners that are not on the live stream. One thing that I did want to maybe get your take. It said that it's very clear that there's no clear indication that the velocity for code changes has increased over the last 2.5 years among the general developer population. And I'm curious, as a CI/CD veteran, and they've seen all the migration and all the evolution and introducing DevOps and the processes and practices and tools and so on. And then we see this. How do you interpret this interesting data?
Well, for me, I definitely believe that CI part becomes more important these days. And what I would say, it's not my official opinion, it's my personal opinion, that the CI part is actually undervalued in the modern ecosystem. And basically, when developer productivity isn't increasing as much as everyone would have hoped for. And for me, one of the issues for that is, of course, quality. Because we still spend much more time on debugging, much more time on troubleshooting things than we actually should. And this is why questions like observability for delivery, observability for production is essential. But it's also essential to actually invest a bit more into quality control, because many issues we see in production these days, like performance issues, memory leaks. Of course, if you approach your infrastructure in a microservice way, if your container is a kettle, of course, you can kill things and restart the thing. But in practice, not many of us actually do that. And I believe that some investment into quality of software would be justified, especially everything that already is a kind of solved problem in all the architectures. So performance testing, stress testing, and many other bits. So I believe that more investment should be put in there for cloud native development and cloud native applications.
Interesting. It's interesting to look as a community how we where we need to improve, because seeing no progress in 2.5 years for me was striking. With all the discussions we've been going on in the community and the tooling and everything.
So the problem with tooling is that there is a lot of best practices. There is a lot of best practices documented. Some best practices get enforced, but not enough. So I believe I still can maintain my career just by recommending to it -ex flags to your bash scripts, because even if it's a common sense for last 40 years, maybe by now, well, at least 30, it's still a lot of people forget about that, and then their pipelines fail in miraculous ways, or more worse, sometimes they don't fail, but deliver crap to production.
And to the next big news, at least for me, this is a major, and actually it was just a few days ago, last week, that OpenTelemetry protocol, OTLP, reached version 1.0. So 1.0 OTLP is out. For those who don't know, the OTLP specification defines the encoding, transport, the delivery mechanism for telemetry data across the different signals, traces, metrics, and logs at the moment. So that's a very, very important milestone that I was happy to, we escorted throughout the show, obviously, but happy to share this reaching maturity and reaching stability within the OpenTelemetry project. And actually, I just wrote an article on open standards in observability, summarizing the important updates from KubeCon and later, so for the past, let's say, a couple of months or so, including this one on OTLP and the sunsetting of open census, the Prometheus standardization, and more highlights that you don't want to miss. So obviously, highlight this could be very interesting if you're looking for more details on relevant open standards, open specifications, and things around that, and recent updates. Another very interesting thing, talking about OpenTelemetry becoming the de facto standard, it was interesting to see even Microsoft also realized that and launched Azure Monitor OpenTelemetry distro, they call it, and saying we are refactoring Azure's native observability platforms to be able to be based on OpenTelemetry. So just looking at one of the biggest vendors out there in the space, and obviously major cloud provider on the top 3, talking and saying that they align with OpenTelemetry, for me was definitely another testament for the importance of OpenTelemetry and it becoming a de facto standard. Another thing, maybe on the event side, very important as we all are gearing up towards KubeCon North America in Chicago in October. I wanted to, for our developers in the audience, make sure that you see the upcoming KubeCon will hold for the first time a developer-centric co-located event, App Developer Con. So it will cover CNCF projects such as Knative and Dapper. So if you are developers and you felt a bit out of context or not properly treated on previous KubeCons, this is about to change, and do check it out. I'll post the link also here for the App Developer Con. What do you think about that? You're also from a developer background, so how do you feel about that, Oleg?
I'm definitely interested. Unfortunately, I won't be able to participate in person because getting a US visa right now is mission impossible for me. But I will be participating remotely as a program committee member and many other events. So hopefully you will have a live stream from the conference.
Yeah, and as a CNCF ambassador, I'm sure that you're happy to spread the word, even if you're not there, because this is a major thing for developers. And I know that at least in my circles, that's got a lot of attention. Another important update just from the recent couple of days, that Jaeger tracing 1.47 is out. For those who are on the open source side of the distributed tracing, this is the open source under the CNCF stack for distributed tracing. Lots of things there. Cassandra configuration feature for TLS, disabling Kerberos for fast negotiation from Kafka consumers, support Prometheus normalization for OpenTelemetry metrics, a proposed OpenTelemetry, and in general, other updates around OpenTelemetry compatibility and other updates. So do check it out. I think definitely an interesting one to see, and showing both the interoperability and the standardization that you and I, Oleg, just talked about also on this chat.
Yeah, I think it's a really good progress on whole ecosystem. So OpenTelemetry definitely becomes a commodity for all kinds of eventing within the scope of what is supported by OpenTelemetry. Though I still hope to see more standardization and unification happening in areas that are not yet supported by OpenTelemetry or cloud events. There is still a lot of gaps for observability that we could address by introducing more open standards.
Yeah, that's for sure. Maybe we have time for one last note. There was the recent DevOps Pulse survey, the yearly survey about the state of DevOps, and in particular, obviously, things related to observability. Was very interesting. Lots of data there, and it's publicly available. But I did compile a few interesting bits and posted them as an article under APM Digest. I called it "Observability as a Complexity Problem," which is something that we've discussed also on this show. So if you're interested, quite a bit of interesting data in terms of the increase in MTTR, in terms of how people address or not address security aspects as part of their process, who is the owner in the security-related aspects, and many other things about tooling, how many tooling they're having, and the increase in tooling in some places. Why they choose open source, by the way, very interesting to see the reasoning, things such as ease of integration, which is essentially the value that we talked about the de facto standards and open specifications and so on, about the obviously cost of ownership and so on. So very interesting. Look up the report, or at least the insights that I shared there. I think very interesting. So with that, I would like to thank you again, Oleg, for joining me for this episode.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for inviting me. And thanks a lot for all your work around OpenTelemetry and specification for CD events.
Yeah, pleasure, and definitely going to follow up, as I said, also on the CD events call next week or in a couple of weeks and this month and more. So thank you very much, and also thank you for all our guests for joining me and for chiming in on this episode. As always, all the episodes are available on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. If you are listening now on the podcast app, then do know that we stream the episodes live on Twitch and YouTube Live. So you can find all the details about that on our Twitter handle at OpenObserve, where about the times of the upcoming live streams, and also to share your comments, suggestions, news bits. If you think there are important things that I missed, happy to get more news bits from you. I'm Dotan Horvitz. You can reach out to me also if you're feeling comfortable on at Horvitz on Twitter or probably any other platform, Mastodon or wherever you find me. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and see you on next month's episode.